Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Asaf Ramarowski. As always, I am your host. I'm the Executive Director of SPME and ASMIA, and it is my pleasure to once again welcome you to our webinar series show. This afternoon, we will have the pleasure, as always, to talk to our friend and colleague, Alex Jaffe, who is the editor of our BDS Monitor. There is a lot to discuss nonstop. It's like drinking from a fire hose, unfortunately, of the reality that we are dealing with, and the ebb and flow is always hard to contextualize, but Alex does a great job putting it all together and trying to frame all the aspects of anti-Semitism and BDS and all its formulation, culturally, politically, socially, and how this all comes together, and the linkages that are critical for us to understand. Just to remind everybody, a lot of the discussion today is detailed in a lot of detail in our ongoing monthly BDS monitor. Here we will discuss a lot of the highlights of a lot of these very issues. And even as the semester is coming to an end, we're not taking a break. The opposition is not taking a break, and we're here to try to explain and dissect all of this. And as always, we are grateful to all of your support and everything else and your understanding and trying to pass on a lot of the work that we do. Format wise, as far as the usual housekeeping, Alex will talk for about 25 to 30 minutes. Then we will go into our Q&A. As always, we will do our best to get to all the questions in a timely fashion. If we don't, please feel free to email us after the show, and we will do our best to respond as soon as possible. So really, without further ado, Alex, thank you for coming back, and the virtual floor is now yours.
Well, terrific. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for being here and for your continued interest and continued support for the cause, for SPME, and on these issues in general. As Asaf said, it's very tumultuous. It's very difficult to figure out, to keep up. Um, I will offer my usual apologies for the rather absurdly granular nature of the BDS monitor that goes out to the list. One of the rationales that I rationalize this is that it's a kind of as a form of historical documentation of just how pervasive and detailed the problems are, and how widely spread in different sectors, not simply academia, but politics, economics, and so on. And everyone is reminded that a shorter version does appear in the Alcheminer, so you don't have to necessarily torment yourselves with reading many thousands of words. But that said, what I want to do today in what is, I think, my last webinar for the academic year. I've done two or three others, I guess, starting before the first semester in the fall. I want to try and give a sense of where I think we are at. And to say that this current semester has been transformative is really to understate the matter. It's been in key terms, it's been a semester like no other. Now, at one level, certainly the number of campus protests is very much down. The encampments, although they had a little upswing in the end of April and into May, those are very much down. University disciplinary measures against pro-Hamas protesters seem to be up, but that's only very particular part of the equation, the overall equation. And I think the overall equation into which BDS and anti-Semitism on campus and elsewhere is very much larger. As maybe some of you have heard me say in the past, our problems in the BDS space um, are are a microcosm of what goes on in the broader space, and broader academic space, political space, and so on. And this semester and this administration, starting on January 20th, has turned literally everything upside down. And the issue really is power. Power and its relationship to money, because this is America and power is very much equated with money, as it is everywhere. Um, and the underlying question about power is who sets the agenda and what is the agenda? What is the relationship between academia and broader society, broader politics, and so on? One way to look at this is to give you all a rather long and possibly somewhat boring and repetitive um, lecture on the nature of the modern university since World War II as an adjunct of American industry, science and industry, and the political economy of that, and so on and so on and so on. I think the problem can perhaps be simplified somewhat in the sense that there was this ideology that emerged, certainly to some extent in the post-war period, and certainly by the 80s and 90s, that everybody should go to college. And that was accompanied by a tremendous stream of free money, primarily in the form of student loans, which caused universities to take that money, believe that money was rightfully theirs, expand their services tremendously, expand their, because they have a vastly expanded client base, and to propagate a series of increasingly bad ideas regarding gender and Jews and settler colonialism and diversity, equity, and inclusion and open borders and censorship and so on back into society as a whole. And in the process, becoming incredibly dependent on the federal government for money, both in the form of student loans, because they were not, which they were not on the hook for. There's currently at least, I think, $2 billion in, $2 trillion, sorry, trillion with a T, of unpaid student loans in this society, which has dragged down the economy, has dragged down individuals and society as a whole. People can't afford to form families. People can't afford to buy houses because they have this tremendous stream of money that they've borrowed courtesy of the government, which the universities then charged them and took away, and which they now apparently have to pay back. Another series, another tremendous unintended consequence. All that is at an end. All that is, uh, you know, we're at a period where we have literally run out of other people's money, where the academia as an institution, as a concept, has run out of other people's money, where for a variety of reasons it was losing the confidence of society as a whole to begin with, because of the tremendous debt burden that it placed on society, on students, and hence on society. Also because the utility that it provided was not tremendously large outside the STEM fields, and even there, American industry, science and industry found it increasingly affordable to simply import talent and labor and talent, and the failures of the K through 12 educational system, and so on and so on and so on. One of the things that helped get us to this stage of crisis, well, there are a couple of things. One is the demographic cliff that everybody's been talking about for a while, and now it's actually here. The number of American high school students available to populate 4,000 or so institutions of higher learning, variously construed, is dropping precipitously. One of the things that is becoming increasingly clear as well is the impacts of artificial intelligence on the nature of education. And just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've read half a dozen articles about how students are basically turning themselves into adjuncts of artificial intelligence, using them to read their assignments, write their assignments, converse in class, and so on and so on. So the whole paradigm of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the Socratic method based higher education is being challenged. The impacts of that are being felt by academia. It is only now becoming an issue that's talked about widely. I know a lot of professors who understand that the assignments that they get and the tests that they get are being done by AIs, and there's really nothing they can do about it because the only thing to do is to have AIs check the assignments to see if other AIs are writing them, and that's not terribly effective. So the whole concept of what higher education is and what it's for is in a certain kind of turmoil. Um, and but to circle back to our issues, so to speak, it's really October 7th, I think, that blasted a lot of these problems out into the open as the institutions themselves responded ineptly to the pro-Hamas agitation of their students and of their faculty. Faculty who are there for multiple years. Students are only there for a few years. And this became a campaign issue for now President Trump. It was an issue that was approached not terribly effectively by the Biden administration. It was approached completely ineptly by the universities themselves. And it's one of the things I think that's contributed to a tremendous loss of confidence in the notion of in the institutions of higher education and questioning what higher education is really about. And it certainly has been, there have been quantifiable reputational impacts on institutions even before the current administration took office on January 20th, that kids were withdrawing their applications to Columbia University because they didn't want to go there. Um, but the pervasiveness of the problems in with respect to anti-Semitism, with respect to the impacts of foreign students, 300,000 Chinese nationals studying in American universities, just one number. The impacts of titanic, absolutely titanic quantities of foreign money, above all Qatari money, but also Saudi, Turkish, Chinese. These came into much better focus after October 7th because people started looking like, what the hell's going on with these universities? So, uh, things that can't go on forever don't. And we're now at a stage uh, of confronting a new political economy of higher education. Now, one of the dirty secrets of this is that insiders actually understood that this couldn't go on forever. I was talking the other day with a friend of mine who runs an academic organization, and who's I won't talk about his politics, but he understood that this can't go on forever, and that this is all that there's a kind of phony baloney political economy that was being artificially sustained by the government, and you know his his reaction of shock to to the idea that University of Southern California charged 65% for indirect costs on grants that it would administer. So you you want $100, but you have to ask for $165. So the vigorish for the university is 65%. He was outraged, and this is replicated, across the entire research component. All the all the crying and yelling that we're hearing about um, the end of American science because the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Humanity are cutting back on indirect costs, but also cutting back thousands of grants. Well, I downloaded a list of over 1,000 grants, and my guess is that probably 85% of them have to do with educational policy or DEI initiatives of some kind, or studying DEI initiatives, and a very small percent that have been cut actually have to do with hard science, the laboratory science that will cure cancer or Alzheimer's, or study this formation of stars, or actual things. The political economy is drying up. And as my friend noted, that the personnel base in all of these federal institutions is being slashed, and it will be impossible to reconstitute. So the universities and us as taxpayers, as voters, are confronting a new situation entirely. And lo and behold, universities are too. So today, and not simply because the Trump administration has decided to, I think maybe quite properly, make an example of Harvard University because of its anti-Semitism problem and because of its badly disguised DEI hiring practices and its propensity to lie about these things to the federal government when confronted with the facts. I think that the universities and university administrations and trustees who have fiduciary responsibilities to keep their institutions going in some fashion are beginning to see the light. And there's one problem. There's one key problem, and that's the faculty. When the Trump administration came in and started cutting research grants and demanding lower rates for research overhead and complaining about, not least of all, anti-Semitism, but also DEI and the way it systematically has distorted the student body and the American faculty by resolutely emphasizing race and gender over merit. The cry went up that there should be resistance, and this is terrible. And American science is ending. American higher education, one of the gems of society, is ending. It's being destroyed, and all sorts of hysterical kinds of visions were and still are being thrown out. And there and as I think I detailed painfully in the last month's Monitor, there are a number of initiatives where universities banded together to resist. They're sharing best practices, they're sharing legal strategies, and so on. At the same time, being institutions that have made themselves dependent on foreign American money, taxpayer money, as well as foreign money, there is a certain realism that's gone into it. So there's a two-level strategy. There was a letter that went out 2, 3 weeks ago from the American Association of Colleges and Universities, in which a few hundred university presidents signed on to, saying, "We must resist. This is terrible. Give us our money." Very tone deaf, I thought. What was interesting was who didn't sign on. The presidents of Dartmouth and Stanford did not sign on to this letter. And there were a number of others, obviously, but among the key top line institutions, you might say. Now, this put them into tremendous conflict with their faculties, who demanded that they must sign, they must show their resistance. But this is a kind of realism. Columbia adopted a different strategy with its new president, Claire Shipman, who's not an academic. She was a member of the Board of Trustees. She sent a number of obsequious kinds of letters saying, "Yes, we're willing to talk." And the wrong strategy is resistance. Well, the really wrong strategy is kind of lying. And there was a perfect example of that yesterday when Alan Garber, president of Harvard sent the administration a letter saying, we want to talk to you. We want to meet you halfway. And then started in with the resistance talk and like, you're cutting our money, it's going to destroy science. And then it ended up with, yes, there's an anti-Semitism problem, but we're really on top of it, and you need to read our reports, and it's not really that big of a problem. I paraphrase, obviously. Well, I read the letter and I started laughing. Uh, and this morning, Harvard has lost another $450 million of grants from the federal government, bringing it up to like $2.2 billion that they've lost, something like that. And so I feel, in a sense, for university administrators, not always the brightest bulbs in the first place, but they're caught in between their faculties who want to resist, who want to go to the mattresses, who want to fight the administration in court, and obviously they are, but who think that all of this is theirs in a very tone-deaf kind of way. You must give us this money, and no, we don't have any problems, and shut up and give us our money and let us conduct business, our business. It's not your business, it's our business. The way we've always conducted business and so on. That hasn't worked. That's not going to work, which is why Princeton yesterday announced that uh, all hiring was going to be frozen. George Washington University announced the same thing today. Uh, some places are talking about reductions in force. I talked in the Monitor about universities investigating bond sales on the municipal bond market, taking loans. Um, Foundations, big foundations like MacArthur and Ford have stepped in with some kind of funding to sustain at least their initiatives, but they can't make up for billions of dollars of federal funding. And beginning to be there's beginning to be voices pondering what comes next. And so I think that I think, hubris has met nemesis. And whatever happens, it's not going to go back to the way that it was. There are not enough students. There are not going to be enough students unless a steady stream of foreign students is somehow imported. And we know the Trump administration's has, well, somewhat, in my view, ineptly, they immediately revoked the visas of about 1,500 students and then made poster children out of a couple of Hamas supporters, one of whom, or two of whom, are actual Hamas sort of adjacent organizers. Um, and then they reversed the visa policy. But I think this will have a chilling effect on foreign students interested in coming to the United States. And that's probably a good thing, maybe, because maybe they'll take more American students. Now, I did a little experiment and I did a little sort of Instagram demography. I went on the admitted students pages of a couple of universities, Columbia, Harvard, a few others, to see who they are highlighting or centering in there. And it's a much more American bunch than they have in the past. Yes, it's kind of ethnically diverse, racially diverse, and so on, but not as many foreign students as they seem to have in the past. It's a very subjective experiment. This suggests to me that they're kind of maybe getting the message, at least about at the PR level. Now, interestingly, they continue to give awards to Students for Justice in Palestine organizers, as organizer of the year or whatever. But I think there are real conceptual changes at work. Maybe structural changes come a little bit more slowly. The political reaction to all this, obviously, has been shock and horror. The you know university faculties regard all of this, which are statistically give most of their political giving, 95% plus of their political giving goes to Democrats, has reacted uniformly with horror, at least the ones who speak out. Um, and they're very much in alignment, obviously, with the Democratic Party, which has put itself on the side in a what I regard as politically inept response of deported MS-13 members, Hamas cheerleaders scheduled for deportation, and the academic status quo ante, where universities and these institutions were these bizarre oligarchic institutions that received billions and billions of dollars of federal money without anybody questioning it. Now, it very much is a contradiction with the anti-oligarch ideology of current party leader or notable AOC and Bernie Sanders, noted private plane enjoyer, who fly around on the private plane talking to rallies complaining about oligarchy. But these kinds of contradictions are rife in American society, and that's how it works. So how does anti-Semitism fit in? And I want to get towards wrapping up and take some questions and hear observations from you all who are out on campuses and so on. It has been a quieter semester because universities are cracking down. Even a place like Swarthmore, because you can't a place where you cannot find a crunchier, more granola laden campus administration faculty, even they shut their recent encampment down in very, very short order. Nobody wants any violence. Everybody understands that the optics of violence are terrible, and that they've had a serious negative impact on their reputations for 18 months. Um, there's a tremendous amount of lobbying that's going on by colleges and universities on Capitol Hill and with the administration. There is a chilling effect that has been complained about. I think that faculty and students complain about a chilling effect that's up here, but the reality is only down here in terms of actionable actionable incidents that universities respond to, like encampments, like building takeovers. And they've become slightly more, some of these have become slightly more violent because they're aligned and staffed by, to some extent, Antifa personnel, particularly in the Northwest. And that's what happened at the University of Washington with the takeover of one of the engineering buildings 2 weeks ago, causing $1 million in damage. So these unity of resistance forces, one might say, or they might say, are on the one hand petering out. And there was a report at Swarthmore that kids who were, the number of kids that are turning out for these protests and encampments is in the dozens now. It's not in the hundreds. The other side, the SJPs and the JVPs, have very much overshot with their rhetoric and with their behavior and with their behavior towards other students, harassment and intimidation of people who would otherwise be willing to support or at least listen. But if you don't immediately get in line, you're derided as a Zionist running dog, or words to that effect. So, you know, Palestinian rejectionism usually engenders a negative reaction on campus and off, and the faculty's still there. The faculty complain bitterly. The faculty can't do very much against the administrations. Columbia University is an interesting example because they have a shared governance structure that was instituted after 1968, after the campus riots and takeovers. And that is now going to be reassessed by the university, um, because the university realizes that you can't put power in the hands of these lunatics in terms of actually making policies about masks and encampments and harassment. And so again, action engenders reaction. Hubris meets nemesis. The problem is that even if the campuses are, let's say, straightened up or cleaned up in some fashion, the effects have already been transmitted into American politics, and we see this in we've seen this for the last 18 months in the streets. We've seen this in particular now by the wholesale adoption of the rejectionist paradigms by the Democratic Party, alignment with migrants against deportation. It's anti-Trumpism, no matter what he has to say. So, what are my cautious predictions? And my predictions are not any better than anybody else's predictions. Uh, I have a certain cautious optimism for universities going forward that they will adapt to the new political realities. They will adapt in a smaller, more lean and compact and economical uh, political economy that American society is offering. They might even uh, pay more attention to Americans, American students, American social needs, and things like that. There might be a longer term trend towards marginalizing some of the extremist tendencies among the faculty. That's hard to say. But I have less confidence about where American society is going to go uh, at least in the short term. I think for the remainder of the Trump administration, it will be just pure rejectionism on the part of the Democratic Party. No matter what the administration says, no matter how high or low the stock market is, no matter how many peace agreements are or are not created by the administration, it just isn't going to matter to this group of people. And our issues, anti-Semitism, are going to be dragged along with this rejectionism of Trumpism and Trump administration policies. And that I think is a very dangerous trend. We'll see what happens in the midterms when they come up. Of there's a whole I mean I'd be very happy to talk for another 45 minutes about the way these issues are being debated and articulated within the two political parties. In neither party is it healthy, really. But I think for the time being, we have to all be aware and work as hard as we can to address local problems at our universities in our and within our local communities, and keep an eye on national and international politics, because everything is connected. It was connected before Trump came along. We just didn't really, a lot of people just didn't want to acknowledge that. But now everything is really, really connected, and it's very much out in the open. And maybe that's a good thing. So that's a good place to stop. Gone on longer than I had wanted to. I apologize for excess loquaciousness, but let's have some questions if we can.
Oh, good. All right. Hold on. Okay. All right. Thank you as always for the uh, extensive
Yeah, a
conversation.
lot of blah, blah, blah. So,
A lot to say. Okay, there's a lot of questions. We'll go to the audience, but let me before we go to the audience, let me just ask one question. I'll take the prerogative. Now that apropos your last comment, a good segue about the politics, and now that we're seeing all of this, okay. So now Trump is in the region, and he is stopping. Next stop after Riyadh, he's off to Qatar. With all the exposure and with all the pressure that we're seeing on the Qataris, with the Qatari Foundation, the Emir's mother has now been received a prize by Georgetown. The Qatari Foundation, I think, you noted in the last monitor, I think we're talking about 29 billion, if not, as far the, between, a sequence of years, that has been vested into American institutions. Um, Talk for a minute about foreign policy now, as far as pressure, when it comes to foreign policy and the American university. Where do you see that feeding into some of these conversations now that Trump is on the ground? Given everything that we've heard about the Qataris and not to mention the connections between some of the people around Trump and Qatar as well. So let's, go from the macro to the micro.
The whole thing stinks. That's
I'm
that's the short version.
sure.
Um, the longer version is that there are wheels within wheels within wheels, and we don't really know. Uh, one of the things that I think we all should have learned last time with Trump is that never take things at face value. You know, always wait a couple of beats before you post your angry tweet about whatever outrage is outraging you. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I don't think anybody really knows what's going on. The whole thing with the plane, I think that stinks. But there's another dimension to that. As donating the plane to the Department of Defense to be rehabilitated by a major defense contractor, so it will be available in 3 years or something. Okay, is that a bribe? Is it not a bribe? I don't know. It stinks, but one way or another. But that's also pressure on Boeing, which is one of the most dysfunctional companies in the U.S., which is the only builder of large commercial and military aircraft, big military aircraft. So there's, a couple of aspects to it. The whole trip to the region is not about Israel. Uh, it's not about donations to American universities. It's not about anti-Semitism. It's about China. It's about, and that I think is one of the things that everybody should keep in mind when looking at any Trump administration policy. That is their number one issue. The number one issue is to minimize Chinese influence on the global economy and political influence in as many regions as possible. And going to Saudi Arabia and signing, I think today was $600 billion worth of contracts for miscellaneous defense um, systems. That that cuts Chinese influence in the region considerably, and that also kind of boxes Qatar in a little bit. Qatar being a very wealthy stalking horse to some extent for Iran. Now, I don't know what's going to happen when he gets to Qatar, which is masterfully, excuse me, tried to play everybody against everybody else for years and years and years, which owns everybody and every institution in Washington, I think from the Washington Nationals through probably 75% of all the think tanks. They, as well as, as you said, 29 and $30 billion in universities. Um, so they've bought they've bought tremendous influence. Um, they own, they pay for Hamas, uh, partly with the agreement of the Netanyahu government. They're so-called negotiators with Hamas. So they're I think a unique wild card that we haven't really seen, playing every side off against each other. But there is a foreign policy implication to what happens on American campuses. Again, the public appreciation of what went on in terms of foreign donations. I mean, people like you and me have been aware of this for 20 years, but now it's actually on the front page of the New York Post, and that's very good. Trump derangement syndrome means that this whole plane deal, which stinks, um, has to be instinctively rejected by everyone who hates Trump. And therefore, Qatar has to be um, held in suspicion and disdain by everybody who hates Trump. So that's actually kind of a good thing. It may or may not even be an intended consequence. It probably isn't intended. So so I don't know what's going to happen. People in our space tend to think that Israel is the center of everything. It's not. They tend to think that the Israel-Iran confrontation is the only confrontation in the world. It's not. Um, and the administration has its eyes very much set on China, and that's, I think, a much more important question. And obviously, the whole tariff thing plays into that concern. The export of manufacturing, the reshoring of manufacturing that is being desired and is to some extent happening, and so on. So, not a very satisfactory answer, I'm afraid, but there are all of our issues fit into these much, much, much larger issues.
100%. Thank you. I mean, obviously, there's a lot to unpack there, but we'll get back to that. So let me go to the audience. We got a bunch of questions coming in, and I'll try to kind of combine them with the time that we have. Lise Corson is asking, I mean, this is also related to our latest piece about recommendations for the universities and what reform actually looks like, but really about more to the specificity of her question about, the question of the ending of tenure. And why don't we link actual performance and job performance rather than actual tenure? And she continues on about of course, if these metrics are not followed, if you're doing indoctrination and ideology and and all of that, why are we paying for all of this? But why don't you talk a little bit about the tenure system and what can be fixed there, getting rid of it. But
Tenure's a funny thing. It's not a lifelong job. It's become a lifetime job guarantee. It started out 100 years ago as a free speech protection. Um, but I think in the longer term, it's probably doomed. Uh, the whole system is obviously rigged. Every university system is rigged, and that one is rigged kind of above all the others. There are only two important systems that in the universities that really, really matter. One is admissions, and the other is promotion and tenure. So promotion and tenure, you promote your friends, your students, your acolytes, your followers, your toadies, your um, kiss asses, and then you give them tenure so you can form a little power structure. In some states, state universities have gotten rid of these things. All universities have performance reviews of one sort or another, where you have to detail how many papers you've written, published, how many reviews, how many external lectures, what kind of things that you've done, how much grant money you've brought in, how many patents you've done in a given year. And that's one of the ways you get a merit raise. Well, merit raises are going out the window because nobody has any money for merit raises these days. And that's come up in a couple of universities. And a couple of Republican-controlled legislatures, and I'm blanking out about which ones, out west somewhere, have decided that the whole tenure thing is has become an outdated job security structure rather than a free speech structure, and they're getting rid of it in place of periodic reviews, employment reviews, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is. I have a feeling that we're heading towards a two-tier system, of private institutions that have some money that keep these things, keeps tenure or something like tenure, extended contracts of some kind, and public institutions which begin to get rid of them. Now, uh, there's a problem with this in that public institutions have already replaced, I don't know what the number is, 65% of all of its faculty with non-tenured track contingent faculty who get paid peanuts to teach one, two, three, four courses. And that's because they can. That's because of there's an available pool of people who want to work like slaves for the institutions. And I mean, I always tell students, whatever you do, don't become an adjunct because you're becoming an indentured servant. And that's another um, that's another component of this that has to be gotten rid of. And the same thing with employing graduate students as teaching fellows, which is one of the reasons why there's so many graduate student unions, many of which, particularly on the West Coast, associated with the United Auto Workers, have become centers for anti-Israel organizing. It's not, I mean, it's just not fair or effective. Getting getting professors back into the classroom, professors who have a reasonable employment contract of 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, I don't, whatever it's going to be. That's that's the goal. But this is also related to other structural changes. I think that a lot of research has to be spun off from universities. That research in physics, chemistry, biology, so on. If you're a researcher, part of your grant, if you're a faculty member, you buy out of teaching. So you say, okay, I don't want to teach. Here at university is $7,000. Go hire an adjunct. Well, that's not good. Yes, it's great for you because you get to do your research, but why aren't you going and just being why isn't there a standalone laboratory? And there are a few examples here and there of such standalone institutions. I think there should be more. I don't have the money to make that so, to take the Harvard physics department and turn it into a physics research institute of some kind. But I think we're at the stage where we have to start experimenting. We, the institutions, um, and tenure, I don't think is going to have a future, much of a future.
Great. Um, so next question, Alvaro is asking, about, some messaging, that we as professional managers, that he's referring to, should convey to the people that, that he's in touch with, circles of influence, regarding BDS and anti-Semitism. Let me add to that, as far as, obviously, you and I have discussed the kind of messaging and understanding of the threats that they present. Here you have also during the hearings that took place, last week, and in my backyard here, the president of Haverford came with her cheat sheet as far as messaging and and denialism that played into what she should say, what she shouldn't say regarding what they perceive as happening regarding anti-Semitism and BDS. But maybe you want to talk a little bit about that as far as concrete messaging that will resonate with the administration and with outsiders that I'm adding here that will potentially create change or at least a path to change.
Well, there's messaging from outsiders like you and me. And, some of us can get our things published in Newsweek, and that has this much traction. And there's a fire hose of these kinds of opinion pieces. Um, I think that messaging from insiders is going to be more effective and more interesting in a way. So I would look, first of all, at all the things that the president of Vanderbilt has put out. I don't remember the guy's name, but he's been very consistent on these issues. And Vanderbilt on opposing the anti-Semitism of the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas movement as it has emerged since October 7th, opposing the calls for resistance on the part of faculty, opposing this in the mindset of entitlement. And lo and behold, Vanderbilt has not been targeted as such for these kinds of administration cuts. As far as outsiders go, I would make the point, as somebody asked a question down here as well. Um, Anti-Semitism is really of a parcel with anti-Americanism. And that is part of the explicit policy, explicit ideology, but also policy of groups like SJPs and Unity of Fields, which is one of the successor groups to SJPs in the New York area, and the Columbia United against Apartheid, Columbia United Apartheid Divest group, smashing the American empire, smashing, smashing the Zionist state, smashing. A lot of smashing that's being called for. And, what starts with Jewish issues, what starts with Israel issues, never ends there, as we know. And that was clear from the very, very beginning with the whole settler colonial um, kind of justifications that were offered for October 7th, that, settler colonialists must die. Well, according to that theory, and according to the logic, not even the logic, the explicit statement, this includes the West. This includes America and the West as a whole. Smashing. There's a lot of smashing. So I think that this is a point that needs to be very much emphasized. The other thing I would say, very briefly, is that this is an opportunity. This is a unique opportunity to think about what the modern university in the 21st century is going to be for, what it's going to be about. And we talked about this a little bit in the last two pieces that were published, that the notion of utility and relevance, which has been oversold by universities, and which is now the new emphasis. I read an article today in Chronicle of Higher Education about Sonoma State, which is one of the Cal State campuses, which is cutting its NCAA award-winning NCAA athletics program and its philosophy and theater and women's studies and all these other humanities programs in order to emphasize things like, informatics and healthcare and so on, because it wants to be relevant to the economic needs of, I mean, that's the other half of relevance. That's the sort of, I guess it's a question of relevance in a social sense and utility in the personal economic sense. Well, their enrollment has dropped by 38%, so they got to do something. I don't know what they're going to do. But this is an opportunity, and let's throw out as many ideas as we can, and let's try and come up with a better consensus. And there's no one size fits all um, approach that's going to work for every institution. And a research one institution is not a research three institution. A small liberal arts college with 1,200 students is not a state university with 60,000 students. And let's emphasize the value to the individual student in terms of critical thinking and stuff like that in the age of artificial intelligence and in the age of high-tech industries and so on and so on. And if we take that opportunity and people come up with dozens of different ideas and approaches, then maybe we'll get somewhere. And I think that's a very positive kind of outlook that we should have, and not a negative outlook like everything sucks. and we should burn these institutions to the ground. Well, I'm the old ways that they're doing things are they're burning themselves, but there should be new ways. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. And apropos, that last point, I mean, that's exactly why a place like Vanderbilt has been surviving. I mean, Vanderbilt has actually done a good job and actually made the place, even 25 years ago, made a huge effort to welcome Jews to campus. And, to their credit, they've been trying to maintain some kind of balance. And Vanderbilt is another place that is desirable these days as a result of that, which
and
is,
it's not because they protect their Jewish students,
no,
in some kind of, they don't bubble wrap
no, of
kids.
course not.
It's because they have an ethos on campus that's about, that's more like the classic liberal approach. We hear these ideas in a respectful fashion,
Right.
but nobody screams at each other or beats each other up.
Right. Discourse
And
actually exists, and you're allowed to
right,
have the university to function the way it should function,
right,
which allows for Jews to be on campus and not to be bubble wrapped to your point, but to allow to be considered as a rank and file member of the institution.
right.
But so to that point, let me ask one more question. I know that our time is short, but I'll go to our friend Bruce Portnoy here. And apropos, the question about, the functionality of the university, I'll try to add to his point here. Bruce is asking about, can we expect any kind of testing to determine the limitations of free speech, as all this is playing out here? Maybe you also, just to say one more point, apropos a place like Vanderbilt, but also maybe talk about, the standard of these issues, has been the Calvin report of, Chicago standards as far as academic freedom and guidelines and whatnot. How is all of that, obviously, you and I have discussed this and have written about this, but the limitations of free speech versus hate speech, and are we seeing any kind of silver linings as a result of the current environment? Or the openness now that we're seeing, more that things are so much out in the open.
I think there's always an advantage to having things out in the open. And one of the terrible benefits of October 7th is that a lot of these things are out in the open now. You know, you talk to the man or woman in the street before October 7th, and they're not going to have heard of settler colonialism as a paradigm and as a now there's a slightly higher chance of them doing it, of them have heard about this. Um, I, you know, as a non-lawyer, I think um, I think that these issues are now out in the open, and we see this actually with some of the deportations. And there's a lot in the law, as I understand it, um, as a noted Twitter lawyer, Wikipedia, division lawyer. There's a lot that's in the law already about protections for A, free speech, but B, um, other kinds of that prohibit other kinds of behavior like the deprivation of another person's civil rights. So if you have an encampment and you impede the movement of individuals around that campus, that's a deprivation of civil rights, no matter what it is that you're saying. Saying bad things, mean things, hate speech, that's something else. Now, the whole concept of hate speech is is very is very interesting, and obviously there's vast legal literature about this, which I am not conversant at all. Um, I tend to be a free speech absolutist. You know, Jews are rather accustomed to being called a variety of bad names: Christ killers, sons of pigs and monkeys, and depending on who's attacking. And I tend personally not to get too bent out of shape about these things. I would not like this to go on in a classroom. And I think that that's a very relevant um, question as opposed to being yelled and screamed at outside the classroom. I think what we find, and this is one of the questions. This is one of the questions that was in effect put to Harvard by the administration, by the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, in one of her letters. The tendentious, one-sided nature of pedagogy. And Harvard and its defenders, which are many, immediately got their hackles up to the effect that you can't tell us what to say in the classroom. And okay, maybe that's a fair point. Again, I'm not a lawyer. What is a fair point is to be able to point out what goes on in the classroom, and simply from the perspective of the disinfecting qualities of sunlight, to who was that? Justice Brandeis, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
I think for too long, since the 80s probably, what goes on in universities and university insiders and its defenders have regarded their activities as having a great deal of impunity. And that doesn't fly anymore. You know, we're paying for it, either as parents, either as alumna who are giving money, either as supporters of universities, or ultimately as taxpayers. I want to know what my money is paying for. So I think that personally, I think that there should be radical transparency. I think every syllabus should be posted online. Now, I'm not at the panopticon stage of transparency, like every classroom should have cameras and, be broadcast for people to judge for themselves whether this is hate speech or this is not hate speech or this is mean or this is tendentious or anything like that. No, but I think it's in the interests of the institution themselves to say, yes, we're not hiding anything. We're open about this. And that they should have these and other kinds of procedures be transparent and accessible to taxpayers, and not hidden or judged or adjudicated by internal procedures. Um, there are various kinds of promotion tenure committees and blue ribbon commissions and kangaroo courts that get constituted when things are bad. And this is not limited to anti-Semitism in Israel and Jews by any means. There's a lot of stuff that goes on at universities that needs to be much more out in the open, because universities, as corporations, yes, they're corporations, um, but they're corporations that depend on our money, hide things all the time. When I was a faculty member at Penn State, I'll give you two examples. Um, I had graduate students come into my office and complain that a faculty member had chased one of them around the desk. That's not sexual harassment. That's like sexual harassment plus. And I'm like, okay, go to the department head, like immediately, go upstairs right now, go, go, go. And they did, and the whole thing was hush hush and handled quietly. Um, I also lived 3 blocks from Joe Paterno, and I would see him in the neighborhood, and he would say, "Hi, folks, how you doing?" And everybody, and then we all know where that went. So universities have a lot to hide, and they have a lot to lose, and they should lose a lot when they screw up at that horrific kind of level. Um, and but at a basic pedagogical level, let's just see what you're doing. I want to see what you're doing. I'm curious. I'm a, I'm a rational adult. I can judge for myself. I don't necessarily want to have a fight about it, but you know, buyer beware.
Exactly. And in addition to all of that, of course, we also want to know where the money is coming from and what it's buying.
Right. Well,
Which,
that's the and that's
the transparency
the
that you were talking about,
the background.
right. It needs to know
Um,
what kind of influence and power that we all know, as to your early comments, with today's show, that this is what the power buys and the influence, and we want to know as fair consumers, as to what are we getting for all of this.
right. When I walk into, I don't know, the Seth Klarman Auditorium at Cornell, okay, I know where the money went. When I see that, subpoenas were necessary to extract the fact that Cotter contributed $1 billion to Cornell for general operating support or something, I have questions. I have real questions about um, not only what that money specifically buys or bought, but also how that changed the atmosphere of the institution. Um, you know, Trump is not going to fly on this Qatari plane because it's not going to be fixed up in time for him to do so. But that doesn't mean that it stinks any less, because a $400 million plane that is gifted to the United States is still a gift. It still buys something, um, gratitude, sympathy, specific policy concessions. I don't know. And it shouldn't happen. So, more transparency is at every level is absolutely necessary.
100%. Unfortunately, that's a good place to end, and unfortunately, we're out of time. I know, and I apologize to everybody. We did not get to the many questions that were still left. There's obviously still much to discuss, and we are still doing our best to deal and unwrap all of these issues as they relate. So I thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Please feel free to email your questions after the show, and we'll do our best to respond. Alex, as always, I'm grateful for your time. We thank all of you for your support, for your ongoing support for our work. We're here to help out on all these issues, but obviously, as you can all see, part of all of this is untangling and the dejumblization, for lack of a better term, of all of these issues that are impacting us politically, culturally, and socially. And we'll be back to discuss more with Alex and with other guests in the future. So thank you for your time and for joining us this afternoon. And we'll look forward to seeing you in a future webinar.